All right, well, we're at 9:30, so I think that we should just get started. Um, Welcome, everybody, from wherever you're joining us from to Housing That Connects Us. My name is Michelle Hoare, and I'm joined by Madeleine Hébert today, and we will be your co-moderators. While our technical host, Ryan, lets everyone in, I just want to take a quick moment to thank our webinar sponsors before I forget, because often I do, and then I feel bad about it. We have wonderful sponsors, BC Nonprofit Housing Association, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and City Community Foundation and Metro Vancouver. And for today's webinar, we're also joined by another co-host, headquartered way over in Ottawa, Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. And I also want to give a shout out to the SFU Morris J. Wask Centre for Dialogue, which is the host organization for the Hey Neighbour Collective. This webinar really is possible today because a year ago they pitched in some funding to help me travel to the UK to meet with others working there at the intersection of housing and social health. And 1 year later, I'm finally getting around to sharing insights from two of the people that I met there. So Ryan, I know that we're recording, so thanks for that. Keep going on. So as we get comfortable, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the city of Vancouver, which are the unceded stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I would really encourage you to share where you're joining us from. And, if you know the name of the more ancestral names for where you live, then that would be very welcome information as well. So a quick little overview of today's agenda. As I mentioned, my name is Michelle Hoare. I'm going to be your co-moderator with Madeleine. I'm also the project director for the Hey Neighbour Collective. And Madeleine is a senior housing specialist with Happy Cities. So we'll talk for a few minutes about Hey Neighbour and then turn it over to our wonderful guests from the UK. So I am so excited to be hosting Natasha Reid and Paul Quinn, who have both generously agreed to join us from London after a very full day of work. So 8 hours ahead of us on the west coast of Canada here. So I had the immense pleasure of meeting both in person while I was in London, and I'll tell you a little bit about them, just very briefly. Natasha Reid is the founder of Matter Space Soul, which is a specialist design consultancy shaping places for health, well-being, and social sustainability. She focuses on the social, psychological, and emotional impacts of places, and often speaks at conferences on forward-thinking approaches to pressing urban issues. She's also a Healthy Places and Inclusive Design expert for London Council, former fellow with the Centre for Conscious Design, and an associate with the Quality of Life Foundation. Natasha will be talking about the place quality framework that she created based on cross-disciplinary research and then implemented as a public practice fellow alongside planners in Brent, which is one of the greater London boroughs. And Paul Quinn is the Vice President of Regeneration for Clarion Housing Group, the UK's largest non-market housing owner and operator. For context, Clarion owns and operates 125,000 homes and houses 350,000 people, which is really a scale that is unimaginable in the Canadian non-market housing sector. So we're quite excited to hear from Paul. Paul has worked in social housing for almost 40 years. The majority of that time has been spent working on regeneration projects, which is what we in Canada would call retrofits or redevelopments. At Clarion, he oversees a £2.5 billion program of regeneration, over $4 billion in Canadian terms, delivering some of the UK's most complex and ambitious residential-led projects. He has a particular interest in intergenerational housing and urban design. So Paul will be discussing Clarion's age-friendly in-place strategies, as well as his involvement in an international campaign around smart, multi-generational neighbourhoods and housing, currently in front of the International Organization for Standardization. So there are two speakers. They'll be speaking for about 20 minutes each. And then we have two question periods. So in the first question period, we have asked a few folks two from the West Coast, one from Ottawa, or sorry, actually, I'm not sure, Lee, where you live, but CHRA is based in Ottawa. And they will ask the first questions of our panelists, and then we will open it up to questions from the chat. So please, as you're listening, add your questions. Our moderator, Ryan, will be kind of looking for common questions and grabbing those from the chat. And then we will wrap up around 10 after 11, and we'll be done by 11:15. So, Ryan, let's launch the first quick poll. So we'd love to know where you are joining us from. And Ryan, do I have to stop sharing my screen? I might, hey?
You could or kept it, but
Okay.
Let's see. All right, just launching. All right. Well done, everyone. People are on it this morning. All right.
Good. We'll get very specific answers in the chat and some more collective answers from this.
I think we're slowing down, so I'll close it.
Okay.
And share the results with everybody.
All right. Okay. Well, that's about what I expected. I thought most of us would be from BC, and then there would be a good portion from elsewhere in Canada, and then some stalwarts still wanting to learn after working hours from the UK, and then we've got some folks from elsewhere too. So this is really cool. So let's stop sharing that one, and I will get back to sharing my slides. All right, Ryan, can you confirm with audio that you can see my slides again?
Yes, can see.
Excellent. Okay, so I will just do a little bit of explaining about Hey Neighbour. So Hey Neighbour is a collective impact project that has been around since 2019. We basically are a whole large group of organizations working together to look at how we build social connectedness, neighborly social resilience, and the conditions for people to age and thrive in place within multi-unit housing. So a lot of the impetus for this was that a number of organizations were looking at increasing trends in loneliness and social isolation and the negative health impacts of that, and also looking at our regions steadily densifying and building more and more multi-unit housing. And of course, more and more of us will live in this housing. More and more of us will be long-term or lifelong renters. So these converging trends being potentially problematic because there's some research to suggest that in some forms of denser housing, people are less likely to know their neighbors or less likely to feel a sense of belonging in the community. Now, that's not a cross-board thing. There are many types of high-density buildings that do offer connection, but it's not the mainstream. So we are looking at both programmatic ways of working in existing housing to build neighborly social connections, but also we're looking at how we build new multi-unit housing and how do we do that in such a way that it intentionally supports social resilience, well-being, and whatnot, especially in a time, kind of, I was going to say post-pandemic, but it still feels on the West Coast anyway, like we're in it a bit. But also with all the climate effects that are happening on a steady basis. So we need these social muscles more than ever, and the group of organizations that we pulled together are interested in looking at how we can intervene in the space of housing to build this kind of social resilience. So we're made up of housing operators, nonprofits, cities and regions, health authorities, researchers, housing associations, and yeah, it's quite a lot of fun. Lots of really great partners doing this work. So we are guided, excuse me, by a theory of change. And our long-term vision is a future where more of Canada's multi-unit housing communities are socially connected, neighborly, health promoting, and resilient. And while I don't have time to go into our whole theory of change in detail, the things that support this are engaged, safe, and empowered residents, proactive housing operators, improved housing design, and more broadly supportive policy. So I'm quite confident that our two speakers will be speaking to at least three, if not all, of these factors in their presentations. So a little bit about a larger project that this webinar and this work sits within. So back in the fall of December 2020, Hey Neighbour put together, along with researchers and a number of our different partners, a discussion paper for the consultation process for our regional growth strategy, Metro 2050, which was in the planning stages and the drafting stages. And one of the recommendations we came up with was that Metro Vancouver, which is our regional government, could play a strong role in fostering design education and dialogue for social connectedness and multi-unit housing. And particularly, we thought, like, let's talk about how we could build housing differently, because that's a space where municipalities and local governments have, a fair amount of influence and jurisdiction. So that paper was quite well received, and we followed it up with 2 workshops in September 2021 and June 2022 that we did in collaboration with Happy Cities. And those were really about how could we mainstream sociably designed, affordable, multi-unit housing? What could that look like? What kind of policy change would we need to see? And as we were doing that, Metro 2050, the regional growth strategy that was being updated, was going through, all of its process. And in February 2023, it was formally approved by all 21 jurisdictions. And now there's a little nugget in the housing policy section of the Metro 2050 regional growth strategy that says all member jurisdictions will adopt regional context statements that identify policies and actions that contribute to, and one of those things is increased social connectedness in multi-unit housing. So that's giving us a nice window to work with local governments to look at their policies. And I'm going to turn it over to Madeline now to tell you a little bit about more about the project that we are in right now that stemmed from that earlier work. Madeline, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Michelle. So Michelle and I have been building up towards this project along with our partners at SFU for quite a while now. And it's been really exciting to be in the midst of it over the last couple of months. So we have kind of a 3-phased approach that we have received multiple different streams of funding for. Phase 1, we were really trying to understand, what has already been done in terms of social connection and policy that specifically encourages building design that supports social connection. And we've been watching the city of North Vancouver for a long time. They've had a policy called the Active Design Guidelines out for about 8 years. And it's quite an innovative policy in our region because it's basically providing incentives to developers to build projects that are innovative and creative and encouraging social connection through features like courtyards, community gardens, and different circulation spaces. So we're really curious to see how this policy has actually impacted what has gotten built in North Vancouver over the last several years. We've been doing surveys with residents, conversations with residents, also visiting a lot of the buildings that have actually come out of the policy. And we're going to put all of this together into a picture of, how can these policies actually impact the built environment? How do people actually use amenity spaces in their buildings? And how are people actually connecting with their neighbors right now? So this report is going to be partially publicly available very soon, so keep your eyes out for that. We're also kind of in the midst of phase 2 at the same time, so we're working with 6 fabulous jurisdictions in Metro Vancouver, Burnaby, New West, North Vancouver, Surrey, Vancouver, and Slawson First Nation. And these are all jurisdictions that are at different places with what they have in terms of social connection in different policies. So all of them have many different policies and guidelines and regulations that help, developers understand what they need to build. Our goal is to kind of get them to step back and look at, how are we talking about social connection generally in our policies? And is that kind of translating into actual real impacts in the built environment? So we're taking them through 4 workshops, which are spaced about 6 weeks apart. And bringing in different subject matter experts, giving them a chance to actually talk to each other and collaborate, say, what are you doing over here? Can we adopt this? What can we learn? So it's really a co-learning opportunity, and we're going to bring that all together in 2024 into a toolkit, which will hopefully help other jurisdictions across the province and across Canada actually, take up this work as well. Go to the next slide. And really, as part of phase 1, we looked at several case studies that are both local and international. And of course, we know that, our housing system is different from the UK and from other countries, but there's a lot of that we can actually learn from each other, getting outside of our own box and our own policies, and actually learning what innovative things other people are doing. And actually, we are facing a lot of similar challenges across jurisdictions. And we're really part of this wider movement that's starting to think about housing a little differently. Something that is a catalyst for social change, a catalyst for social connection, a catalyst for equity. And we want to challenge developers, planners, property managers, people across the housing system to really start thinking about housing differently, start thinking collaboratively, and see what solutions we can come up with. Next slide, Michelle. Oh. And of course, we're talking about social connection, equity, inclusion. All of these things are really great and important. At the kind of core of the housing conversation is always this affordability. This is something that we're really challenged with in our particular context in Vancouver. So if we cannot provide, safe, secure tenure for people that is affordable for them, all of these other things are kind of, they're not going to happen. So this is really our foundation. We need, secure, safe housing choices for everyone. And then we can start building on social connection, inclusion, joy, sociability, health, all of these great things. This is what makes up a full and thriving life for everyone. And that's what we're kind of working towards with our housing policies and design. And Natasha will talk really well about this. And beyond design, we know that design is just one piece of the puzzle. Programming is also really important. Policy is really important. So how can people actually use the spaces? How are the spaces programmed? Are there coordinated activities or coordinated people who are actually helping to connect neighbors? So our building can only do so much. But if we create a building that provides these opportunities for people to bump into each other, provides opportunities for people to feel safe, for them to have both privacy and kind of social connection, we can start to build a more complete picture of social connection in our buildings. And what we're really working towards is communities that are mutually supportive. And we've researched these communities during things like the COVID pandemic or heat domes. When neighbors mutually support each other, people are less likely to die during a heat event. They are more likely to support their neighbors during COVID. They have these kind of built-in social networks right in their housing, which is what we're trying to work towards. And this is all going to make our societies more resilient, more equitable. It'll help people age in the right place. It'll help kids grow up, experiencing a diversity of perspectives. It'll help people have a really strong sense of belonging and meaning in their communities as well. So that's the blue sky, what we're working towards: mutually supportive, socially connected housing. And I'll pass it back to Michelle.
All right, thanks so much, Madeline. So we're going to move right along. We will hear from Natasha in just 1 second. So quickly, if you have any technical questions, Ryan Cope is our tech host. Please direct any questions towards her through the chat. Please stay on mute, but we're very happy to see your face, so be welcome to turn your video on, and just probably doesn't need to be said, but be respectful with each other in the chat. And just for fun, we like to have a chat question. So our question today is, what was the friendliest place you've lived to date, and what do you think made it that way? And if you have any little quick chattable stories about ways that your neighbors have impacted you positively, we'd love to hear about that too. In past webinars, we save the chat and then actually kind of publish it along with the video and presenter slides, which is kind of fun. All right, so Ryan, very quickly, let's fire up our second poll before we go to Natasha. And I'll stop sharing.
Okay, we have our second poll question. Once again, everybody is on it with this question. Well done.
We really like this question because it makes people think a bit differently. It's not just how many neighbors do you know, but how many do you know well enough that you could ask for help or offer help.
Mhm.
It's a different level.
A couple more seconds. Okie dokie. I will close it down and share the results with everybody.
Okay, so this is not too dissimilar from what we saw last time. Was it a shocking number of people who know nobody on their block or in their building well enough? So 16% of you don't know anybody in your building or your block well enough to ask for or offer help. So that's really saying something, because I suspect that people coming to this webinar are, probably really value social connection. And so that says something, I think, that we need to, societally work on this. And some of you are very connected. Some of you know 7 or more, or 4 to 6. So that's the good news. Anyhow, so we will move on and turn it over to Natasha Reed.
Thanks, Michelle and Madeline, for inviting me today. I'm going to just share my screen. Hopefully that's come up okay. Great. So today I'm going to talk about something called the place quality model, and that's focused on putting human well-being at the heart of how places are made. Oops. So this is a new approach, but also it's a framework and system change. It aims to embed health, social well-being and inclusivity into places by prioritizing human needs, human nature and human experience. And it creates change by essentially reframing how developments are expected to be designed and assessed for planning permission, to put how places impact people front and center of that process. It's part of new innovative planning guidance for a London borough, the Borough of Brent, and it creates a set of new benchmark and requirements for the benefits for people to be demonstrated as part of the planning process. So today I'm going to share a bit about the journey and how this came to be. So how it's gone from the work that I've been doing in terms of bringing research about how places impact people into the design of places, and then how that's been applied into the work of local government. Then I'll share more about the approach in detail and the framework, how does it work, how it's a bit different from what we've got at the moment. And then lastly, I'll finish on the topic of what's next and the aims for this to see change and catalyse collective action and the need for that, I feel. So the journey has been very much about starting by really understanding how people are affected by places. And my background and training has been in architecture, and I practiced that. But 10 years ago now, I sort of stepped away from more traditional practice to focus on research, how people are impacted and that human dimension of place. And now there's more and more awareness and also evidence of how our surroundings affect how we feel, how we interact, behave, our sense of community, identity and belonging. And all these things come together to shape and impact our quality of life, health and well-being. Today we're here to talk about homes that connect, and we know that our surroundings can either enable or disable social connection by the way that they're shaped and how they support that social interaction. And there's much more awareness about the impacts of loneliness and isolation being considered as higher risk factor for mortality as smoking. So there's definitely need for new approaches. So my ethos and the way that I work is around the concept of urban empathy, and that's about shaping places from the inside out, which is basically understanding how places affect us as individuals and communities, and then applying that to design. So that's drawing from research that exists in disciplines like environmental psychology, neuroscience, even anthropology and the social science around how people behave, interact and feel. And so I had developed a new framework for design that was about the human experience of places, and that starting point being our human needs in nature as a way of shaping the habitats that we create for ourselves. And then we had the pandemic, and following that, this is when this approach has been implemented into local government in London. And there's a programme which Michelle mentioned, which is called Public Practice Programme. And this basically places different professionals from the built environment, many architects, into local government to bring different skills, but also to drive change. So I spent a year and a half working within Brent Council, partly in-house, to develop this work. For context, the borough has a population of around 340,000, and it's the 5th largest London borough, and it's experiencing very high levels of growth. So there's lots of areas of high density and high rise in particular, thinking about multi-unit housing. And the borough already had some quite progressive policies around amenity space in residential development, and there was a very high requirement in terms of area that needs to be provided, and it's actually 4 times the amount for other London boroughs. But what the council needed was new guidance on what the quality of that space would be. So that's how this came to pass. And with my sort of specialism on health and well-being, that filled in a lot of the questions they had about how we're going to define what is quality. How should we be defining that in the post-pandemic world? So I'll explain a sort of overview of the approach and how it works, and then I'll show a bit more about the details in depth of how it gets applied. So the first thing is a shift, and I think Madeline was talking about thinking differently, and it's about prioritizing people-focused outcomes as the outcome for development. So moving away from the quantitative side of numbers and visual appearance and form, which is sort of the status quo of looking at the physical factors of places, but going beyond that and actually looking at the qualitative side, the human experience, the outcomes for people, and shifting to those human factors, and that being the driver and the starting point. And essentially it's starting to reframe the way that design quality is considered to be about the human experience of places. So that it covers a wide range of factors, from people's physical and mental well-being to enabling social connection, building strong and integrated communities, encouraging inclusivity and intergenerational mixing, and also the less tangible aspects of sense of place, belonging and ownership, and starting to think about how can we empower people through place. So a bit more context about Brent and how this was addressing some of the real kind of priorities and local issues. It's an area with lots of challenges around health inequalities, deprivation. There's a great deal of cultural diversity, but also issues around social cohesion. So there's a lot of potential opportunity there to make change in response to these challenges. And the process of sort of bringing the teams on board with this approach was very much about sharing knowledge that exists out there about current best practices in terms of healthy spaces and more sociable approaches. And I'd in fact at the start shared some of the work from Happy Cities to show, this is what other places are looking at, and we should be doing that too. So that's been really great to sort of join up in a small way. And this, it's partly design guidance, but it also creates a whole set of requirements, which covers developments from the scale of the master plan all the way down to the details of corridors. It's covering both external spaces and internal spaces, and in some cases, the public spaces associated with development, not just the the, 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 I suppose it's reflecting on the fact that shared spaces are so important for quality of life in different ways. So the framework is structured in these three broad dimensions of outcomes. So health and well-being, community and belonging, and vibrant and inclusive places. So it's broadly looking at topics such as importance of green space in cities, but also social interaction and social inclusion, and starting to tie in with the co-benefits in terms of green spaces and nature and sustainability. So trying to start to link those two aspects together between well-being of people and planet. And what's quite important is that it creates a set of requirements, but that are also used in context of place when we think about equity. So here on the left, we've got a map of open space deficiency, and on the right, a map of deprivation. So there would be higher requirements to deliver on quality of life where there's greater need. So it gets kind of shifted. The level of expectation will be shifted according to that context. And as a sort of overview before I go into some of the details, it's about empowering designers in one sense of bringing in research and evidence about how places affect people, and then also creating a change within the planning system. So it's got these two sides to it, and it helps to bridge the gap between a lot of the research that's happening towards practical application of how these things are going to be achieved. So it's trying to bring together holistically a range of different topics, from tackling loneliness to creating equitable, inclusive spaces, to the benefits of green spaces, creating spaces that are safe for women and girls. All of these things kind of work together if we're thinking about creating connective spaces. And it's about design that's focused on outcomes rather than a tick box checklist of features to include. So it's aiming to address quality of life in a structured way and open up possibilities. And so this framework gets used to create, applicants will be asked to create a quality statement using this framework. And I'll show you all the set of sort of questions to answer how are they benefiting people's quality of life through the design. So that's quite new in terms of requirements for planning here. So I'll take you through some of the steps just to give a flavour of what that is without going into all the details. But the first step and tool that makes this up is about the first principles when you're coming to design the development, and it's very much about drawing out the specific aspects of the place. So the first question is, about the users, and asking who are the users, what are their needs, what is the socioeconomic context, and then there's a series of questions to explain what is the user journey, looking at human scale, looking at nature, and then in the context of this discussion, social integration and connectivity to the wider area. So that's the sort of right from the first principles of, we have something called the pre-application process here in the UK, which happens before making a full planning application. So this would be expected to be used at that stage. Then it goes into more detail around different aspects of quality of life based on research-informed practices. And these form, there's a set of criteria which form sort of building blocks to go through and respond to across these three different categories. And the different criteria range from more sort of fundamental baseline levels of practice or expectations to things that are currently more leading practice and slightly more exceptional. So there's a whole range in there. And that then breaks down into a whole series of questions, and I'll show this in more detail, just to give an overview about those qualities of space and really going into different aspects and criteria of these different dimensions, all about the human experience again of that place. And the statement that would be produced for the development would be required to be evidenced in the drawings. So if we're answering certain questions about how is this good for people, it has to be shown in quite specific detail. So that's, I spent some time sort of designing this assessment process as well as the sort of initial guidance to make it quite straightforward for the officers to use as well from their perspective. And sort of going back to the topic of homes that connect, and that being something that touches on so many different aspects. This is a quote from Campaign to End Loneliness in the UK, that what makes social connection develop or not is found in those details, the perfect spot for a bench that's nice for a chat, or the shared space that's not used because it's dark. So there's so many different factors to it. So I'll show, this is now going to more of the details of this framework and the toolkit that would be used to assess the design, but also can be used to generate the design and sort of create ideas. So it will start with health and well-being and asking questions about, is this a comfortable, active or relaxing place? Is it going to feel appropriately peaceful or lively given what type of space it needs to be, which is quite baseline, towards more leading practice being, is this a usable, cared for and empowering place? Can residents actually access it? How convenient is it to use in everyday life? And the really kind of most leading aspect of this is asking, are residents and communities involved in co-design, co-production, and engagement that goes beyond typical consultation? So that's very much about the empowerment aspect. And there's a set of examples of for each different area of to show what that could look like. So for sort of creating comfortable and sociable spaces, there's an example of internal spaces in a development with a very spacious lobby. There's views through to different areas, so you can actually see who your neighbours are, and actually when you walk past, you know, you can see if there's someone that you want to go chat to that you recognise. To things like creating attractive spaces, restorative spaces, places that people want to be in. So there's an example here of playable landscaping. So it's about creating those environments that people actually want to spend time in, I think, in the first place. And then moving to community and belonging. So this is a bit more directly about social interaction. Starting with the baseline level is about, is this a distinctive place? Is this a place that's going to support a sense of identity for people? The good practice level is asking, is this a sociable place? Does the design encourage people to spend time there? Are there any features that encourage dwelling or a reason to stay and pause? It could be as simple as a bench. To more leading factors about building community and that the long-term relationships between residents, and the drawings that Madeline showed at the start with those different kind of levels, this sort of follows that pattern. And then the leading practice is, how does the design go beyond sociability to create social capital, which is about that mutual trust and relying on people and having those networks. And these are a couple of examples, where it's just a place to sit and pause, having your seating orientated towards what people are doing and views. And that's more about creating these sort of bumping spaces and opportunities to meet people, and more what would be termed weak ties, to places that build connection on a bit more of a recurring basis. So there's examples of places to sit outside with your neighbours, or corridors with features that might encourage you to stop and pause, and even have windows so that it becomes a nice space to inhabit. And and to more kind of sustained building of communities. There's an example of a space dedicated for sort of intergenerational mixing, or thinking about social capital, things like community gardening and building up those relationships over time, and people having a shared sort of space and goal to work around. And I just wanted to highlight that in terms of affordability, all of these principles are based really on the quality of the space rather than the sort of level of finish, and it's about the real fundamentals of sort of natural light and views through to other people and how people move through that space, which can be built into the design. So I'm going to skip, sort of do a brief overview of the rest because I think I'm coming to time. But the last section is about creating vibrant and inclusive places, and this is shown sort of the full extent of the different questions, but it asks, starting with, is this a safe place where people want to spend time there, to are there opportunities for people from different walks of life to meet? Is it inclusive to different types of people? And going into more detail about different types of user needs and asking, is this child friendly? Is this responding to the needs of older people, to women, people with protected characteristics, and the leading practices? Is this going beyond creating places for sort of everyone, to give really specific consideration to a wide range of needs? And this is an example of housing for older people with that kind of sociability built in. So, for example, just having wider corridors with places for people to sit. And the way that this gets shaped for assessment is that the bigger the development, the higher the expectation will be to deliver on quality of life, and particularly for high-rise and high-density developments, that increases as well. And it's, in a way, it's about creating systems change. So it's about sort of shaping it to the specific places and the needs of people, creating these quality of life outcomes as the benchmark, and then asking, expecting higher quality of life outcomes where there's the greatest need. So just to wrap up really quickly, the outcomes, the aims of the outcomes for people is, I suppose, quite directly to focus on well-being and to improve people's lives in terms of healthier, happier places, but also looking at how the benefits of growth are balanced more equitably. And this can be used to support community participation and co-design to input right at the start. For the industry and for practice, it makes it really explicit what the outcomes are to design in. It's aiming to make it really easy to apply within either the design and planning process, because often a lot of research is quite difficult to sort of translate, and it's empowering people to advocate for better design. And just as some background of how this got implemented, I've done training for officers to sort of build on their existing understanding. There's a lot of flexibility for them to respond to things on a case-by-case basis, and they're looking at joining up with public health on ways to sort of work together. So the long-term aims are putting people front and centre of both the design and planning process, prioritising quality of life and connectedness as a matter of course, to hopefully make what is currently exceptional the everyday. And I'll end here, which is the next phase, which is looking to seed wider change, sort of collective action around this, to bring together lots of different research and initiatives that's happening already. I think we need to join up all the work that's happening into something that's unified and a sort of structured approach to be able to actually implement these types of approaches and make change together. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. That's really quite amazing and so detailed. I really appreciate that. And we're excited to be part of that seeding wider change with you. Hey Neighbour and Happy Cities and Natasha have been talking about some potential collaboration. Fingers crossed that maybe the funding will come through and we'll be able to more formally work together across our two countries. So thank you, Natasha. We will switch over to Paul now. If you'd like to share your slides.
Just bear with me while I pull those up. Okay. Hope everyone's seeing those now.
Yeah, all good.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. Well, first of all, good morning, Canada, and good evening, colleagues in Europe. Thank you so much for inviting me here this evening for us. It's a really, really interesting seminar, and thanks to Natasha, really interesting introduction. And no surprise, it's going to be a bit read across from what I'm going to say and what Natasha's been talking about. So if I get this to move, bear with me. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to begin with this quote. I often begin with this quote, and it's interesting. We've got at least one participant on from Copenhagen this evening. Very welcome, my favorite city in the world. But Jan Gehl is my great hero. And what I like about this quote is, in my world, this built environment world, our world really, there's a lot of talk about physicality and density and materials, but actually at the end of the day, this is all about human beings and all about creating great places for people to live. And the architecture is actually the easy bit. It's the building sustainable communities, sustainable neighborhoods that will last through decades and adapt through decades. And I think this is at the core of what we really need to do. So I just want you to try and remember that quote for the next sort of 10 minutes or so as I take us through some of the thoughts. So first of all, who are Clarion? Well, we're a non-profit making charity. Our origins are back in the year 1900 when the Victorian businessman William Sutton died and left his entire fortune, which is around about £200 million in today's money. He left it all to housing the poor. Now, unfortunately, he didn't tell his family, so they weren't that happy. And about 7-8 years of litigation later, we built the first social rental homes that Clarion owned. And today we own 125,000 homes. We have around about £1 billion in turnover. And we're a significant house builder as well. We build around 2,300, 2,500 new homes a year and employ 4,000 staff. So it's a big operation. We are the UK's largest housing association, which is quite a dangerous place to be, because when things go wrong in the housing market in the UK, and they go wrong on a daily basis at the moment, we're always top of the call list for every journalist. So we get dragged into everything that's kicking off. So we're very keen someone else becomes the largest housing association over the next few years. Now, what I'm going to do in this next sort of 15, 17 minutes, whatever I've got, is I'm going to talk through some of the principles of what I think make for good quality, sustainable neighborhoods. And then towards the end, I'm going to particularly talk about multi-generational neighborhoods and the work we're doing around that, because these things are one and the same to me, but we'll run through some ideas. And if I sound like I'm bigging up Clarion as I'm doing this, please feel free to challenge me in the Q&As at the end. There's a great many things we're not doing very well at all. But what do I think makes a successful community? Well, these are the sort of 5 principles that I'm going to explore in a moment or two. And we're going to look at each of these in turn, just for a minute or so. The scheme on the right-hand side there is one of our regeneration schemes that we've just finished. And if you saw what that site started like, which was asbestos-filled little garages, and now it's really nice quality homes with the world's most expensive wooden sheep imported from Germany, eye-watering cost. But this is, to me, this is where we have incredible power to transform people's quality of life through the built environment. And I'll want to just talk through some of the principles that we try and apply. This isn't new. In Britain here, there's a long history of model villages and model cities. The scheme on the left-hand side there, 1904, this was built by the Roundtree family who make the chocolate in York. And this is New Earswick, just outside York, built for the workers of the estate and their families. And again, the principles of mixing everything up, all ages living together, employment on the doorstep, accessible public open space, and fairly dense, because it's all sort of built out of terraces and at heights in different places. So these principles have been around for a while, and there's quite a lot of talk in the UK at the minute about replicating that sort of approach. And the building on the right-hand side, this is called span housing, and this was all designed by a single architect. There's a number of span developments through the southeast of London by an architect called Eric Lyons, very influenced by Scandinavian architecture, and his whole principle was building at density, blurring the boundaries between the public and the private space, so everyone had to connect and meet each other. Even where the car parks were designed, people were encouraged to bump into each other, and a lot of light coming into buildings. This is actually the building I live in, and this is called Hallgate, and my flat is on the top floor behind that yew tree, above the gaps. This is where I live, I'm really interested in these principles. Way back then, he was thinking about this, and we're seeing these replicated a lot of thinking here in London at the minute. So let's kick through some of those principles. So the first of those is people make the place, and by what I mean here is it's very, very important that when we're working on improving existing or building new neighbourhoods, that we work with the existing population and existing stakeholders right from the very, very start, before there's a single pencil line drawn on a page by an architect, and that you lay out clearly with people at the outset the parameters of what is possible and what is not possible, what they can influence and what they can't influence. And so we spend a lot of time on this level of engagement on our schemes, and that will be taking residents on site visits and going to look at other developments. What do they like, what do they not like, bringing in external organizations maybe to run sessions on how to interpret a plan, what the role of the architect is, so people, when it comes to make a choice, it's an informed choice, and increasingly a lot of digital engagement, because fundamentally people are the same the world over, and what they're interested in are neighbourhoods that are safe and sociable and welcoming and attractive. And we need to hear that from the start. There's no point having this conversation halfway through the design process. It needs to be there at the start. So this is a big part of the approach that we apply in our own regeneration schemes. So to sharing spaces and sustainability, there's a real aversion to density and shared spaces very often, particularly the discussions I'm having with a lot of local authorities. And this scheme that we're working on here is the CGI image. We've already built the first phase. If you remember the wooden sheep, this is the second phase you're looking at here, which we're constructing at the minute. Here we're doubling the density, but at the same time we're putting in sustainable urban drainage. People's homes are larger. We have 1 in 3 overcrowded families on this estate. Everyone's going to go into a home of the right size. So it's all about the design quality, and it's all about bringing the population along with you and understanding what's important to them. That's that process we just talked about, and making sure that that's replicated in in terms of what comes forward. So we're doubling the density in this estate. One other project I'm working on, we're trebling the density. And again, these are schemes that are well received by residents. It's because we've spent the time to take them through what we're doing and to understand what their needs are. And in a post-COVID world where people are going to spend much more time in their own home and in their own environment, it's very important that that process has been gone through in some detail. Again, in the UK, we're very good at separating everyone by tenure or by age, and it's completely wrong. We know that people like to live in a mixed up society. People live happier, healthier lives when it reflects more a society as a whole, rather than, you know, we build homes for the young professionals, for the private sector sale, for private rent, for social housing, very often with quite different access to public space or play areas or even doors in some instances. And again, the principles we're trying to work to here is to mix it all up. So this building behind you here is about to go on site. We'll be starting building this next year. And this is where we're going to be housing homeowners, social housing residents, older people. On the roof towards the top of the building, we have 4-bedroom family accommodation where there are disabled people moving in. We've done individual OT assessments, occupational therapy assessments, so their homes are bespoke to their particular needs. And this is a deliberate policy of ours to try and reproduce what society really looks like, rather than how we traditionally do built environment. So again, a very important part of the approach. And then we come to this sort of point around control and ownership, which Natasha touched on as well a little earlier. This really stems right from the very earliest conversation. So all that time that goes into talking to people about the future of their neighborhood, that all needs to be carried right through, because actually the build time is you're maybe on site building a phase for 2 to 3 years. But if you designed it right, those homes may have a century of public sector service. And so making sure that people are connected with those homes and feel ownership of those homes right from the start is a very important part of what we do. And so we'll design spaces specifically with a view to them being looked after by the neighbourhood itself, so stewardship by the residents. This little image here is from a balcony greening project. So on this particular estate, fewer than 1 in 3 households had private outdoor space. Now every home has private outdoor space, a balcony or a garden or a roof terrace. And so we're encouraging people to green up those spaces. So we ran this little project with them, and we do lots of little things like that just to help communities bed down. And that all sounds great, but this actually is what most new housing looks like in the UK. You know, obviously we're trying to raise our game, but that's not true of the UK building sector as a whole. We build some of the worst housing in Europe. It's quite a lot going on in the national press at the minute about the quality of the buildings themselves, but from an urban design perspective, we're really very poor in it. There's a very good study was done by Professor Matthew Carmona at UCL, University here in London, where they did an audit of design quality across the UK. It was just done 3 years ago. Worth a look if you've got time, worth looking, and you just see actually how generally poor the standard of our accommodation is. And this, to me, it's largely down to the fact that we have this very unusual housing market, which is dominated by no more than 6 or 7 major house builders. And they've been building houses like this for about the last 100 years, and it works very well. It's a business model. Thank you very much. And they just continue to do it. And we've never really addressed that. So unfortunately, for all those nice images I showed you a little earlier, I know I'm sure all the great schemes that Natasha showed us earlier, most of our new housing ends up looking like this. Long way to go. So intergenerational living, why are we particularly interested in that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've been providing social housing and new builds for a century now, and chances are we're going to be providing homes for another 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And so if we need to be very mindful of the changes that we're seeing in society, and one of those changes is we're seeing an aging population. And we know this is certain in the UK here, and I'm sure it's the same across all the countries people are watching from this evening. We're seeing huge expectations around preparing for climate change. So lots of building regulations coming through, lots of planning policy coming through, where climate change is front and center, and that's obviously incredibly important and just right. But we know demographic change is just as certain, and no one is preparing for it, and it's potentially just as impactful. And here in the UK, different than some European countries, but here in the UK, we're making no preparations for that at all. And we, as the UK's largest landlord and a provider of housing for a century now, we need to be anticipating that, because if we don't do it, no one's going to do it. So we're really interested in this ISO standard, international standard, around neighbourhoods, because it'll be one of those hooks that we can use in developing our projects going forward. And so obviously we think it'll help us build better homes and better services and improve standards. Critically, better outcomes for our residents. And one of the key principles of that is breaking down this segregation that I alluded to a little earlier. And critically, we are a large player in the built environment sector here, and we have a responsibility to push our sector to do better. So we have this one-size-fits-all business model. This is why we get these terrible estates that I sort of showed you earlier. There's no political driver to anticipate these changes, this demographic change yet. But what we want to be able to demonstrate is actually there's a good business model underpinning it. And so we're going to try and introduce some aspects of this into some of our schemes going forward. And part of it is disrupting this cloning of design. We just build houses the same way we've always built them. The technology sometimes changes, but actually they look the same pretty much as they maybe looked like in the Victorian era here in the UK in particular. So we're trying to change that and help close out that policy gap. There's any number of cross-party parliamentary papers and studies on the impact of climate change, but very, very little policy coming through about the impact of demographic change. And so we want to try and change that discussion a little bit. And as I say, sort of pay attention and prepare for the change that's going to impact us as a business, and obviously our residents and all the future generations that come to live in our homes. So a couple of quick examples of how we're trying to play that out. Now my colleague Sarah Mitten is on this call tonight as well, and she's the architect behind our age-friendly commitments, and Sarah's going to be on the Q&A a little later if people have particular questions around this. But this is us trying to ensure that all aspects of our business, our development side of our business, our housing management side of our business, and Clarion Futures, which is our charitable arm, which is where Sarah sits within the organization, that we are all signed up to the principles of building and operating age-friendly neighborhoods and buildings. And we don't mean properties for older people here, we mean age-friendly, all ages. So it's intergenerational. So it's about from single people through young family units to older family units to maybe two children leave and people left in their own home to maybe even end of life. So that's the principles we're trying to embody in the organization as a whole. And sort of related to that, I'll apologize, I know you won't be able to read this, but just bear with me, it exists. Principles of around play. Again, play gets so misunderstood within the built environment. 9 times out of 10, the play equipment is bought out of a catalogue at the end of a scheme by the contractor. And actually it needs to be integral in all our thinking from the very outset. And again, Sarah's been driving this thinking within the group as a whole, trying to get people to think carefully about play. Play for all ages as well, not just for younger children. There's several other sort of strategy work to it. It gives you an idea of just how we're trying to move the agenda along a little bit within the organization. Last couple of slides. If you are interested in this subject matter, can I recommend this book? This is written by a colleague and friend of mine, Caroline Dove. She's a partner with HTA Architects. She and I speak quite often in multi-generational and intergenerational design. I've stolen some of the ideas from her for this webinar here this afternoon. But it's a very interesting book. And what I like about it is it's just full of case studies. There's some very good thought introductions, but really it's really good case studies. So if you get an opportunity to come across that, please dig it out. And then my last slide. So I started with Jan and I'll end with Jan. This, at the end of the day, is all about people. For all the billions of pounds that we pour into housing in the UK and across the world, really at the end of the day, the objective is to build places where people are happy, can live a healthy life, can live an independent life for as long as they want to. And that doesn't happen automatically. You have to be thinking about that right from the very start. That needs to be a core principle. And it more often than not is not a core principle. And I think those of us on this call who have the opportunity to influence that, I hope some of these thoughts resonate a little with you and you take something back out of this 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was amazing. And I want to reflect quickly on a few things that came up for me during both yours and Natasha's talk. So when I was looking at where I could go to meet interesting people on housing and health, it was because I had been invited to Barcelona to present at an international symposium on loneliness. And it had been ages since I'd traveled internationally. And I thought, well, if I'm going all the way to Barcelona, I should, deal with like the fact that I'm over there and go somewhere else. And I thought, could I go to Copenhagen? Could I go to Vienna? All these places we always think of as like either real leaders in, sustainable, more kind of socially connected housing, more affordable, secure tenure housing too, in some ways, especially Vienna. But then I thought, or do I go to somewhere that's actually a lot more like Canada? That's maybe not actually leading edge, but find the leading edge people and organizations in that place in a context that is actually more like what we are living. And so I think those of us from Canada would see a lot of commonalities in what you guys were talking about, and the status quo practices, some of the barriers, some of the kind of similar conditions. And the other thing I just wanted to say too was I just love the age-friendly definition that you use. And that's something I really, and Hey Neighbour really reiterates a lot, is that age-friendly housing doesn't necessarily mean just for older people. We're all aging the moment we come out of the womb. And so as more and more of us are long-term or lifelong renters because of the affordability crisis, and as more and more of us are living in multi-unit housing, we really need to think about the life course. And that's what you were talking about there, Paul, right? And as a housing operator, these are buildings you're managing for maybe 100 years. And so you need to think about that even from just a cost perspective. So just wanted to reflect on that. And lastly, you said, we want to let people be able to live independently. And we've been reflecting a lot on that term, independent. And in fact, what I think we're all talking about is interdependent housing, because none of us are truly independent. It's a fallacy. We don't want to be. We don't really want to be independent. We want to be healthy and connected and have autonomy. But nobody's independent. We don't truly want to be. And so we need housing that supports kind of a healthy interdependence. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the first part of our Q&A session. Luckily, we left lots of time for this Q&A conversation. So I'm going to turn it over first to William Azaroff, who is the CEO of Brightside Community Homes and the board chair of BC Nonprofit Housing Association. So William, you get the first question.
Thank you so much. And Natasha and Paul, thank you so much. It was a couple of great presentations. There's so many things I could ask about, but one of the things that jumped out on your presentation, Paul, is, it's funny, I think we do a pretty good job before we do, say, a redevelopment of engaging our residents, but what you described is so much earlier. So I'm curious, like, whenever you do a redevelopment, there's more constraints than opportunities in a lot of cases. And so what are the challenges and what's gone surprisingly well when you engage residents or tenants that early before you even have an architectural plan? Before, you know, that really floored me. That's a whole level beyond what we're doing. So yeah, anything you can reflect on that would be really interesting.
I think a really good question. I'll talk about what goes wrong as well. But the reason why we do it so early is because it's the master plan that's the key here. You know, everyone focuses on the architecture. Architecture is the easy bit. Say London is stuffed full of great architects, but a good master planner is like hen's teeth, we would say here. You know, there's not many of those around. Now, if you have already launched down the path without engaging residents in the master planning process, then you're already too far down the path. So you need to have that conversation right at the start, because that's the bit that's not going to change almost certainly over the next 50, 60, 70 years. The neighbourhoods tend to be laid out the same way. And buildings may change in function or form or, you know, the adaptation, but actually the interconnection between them, how people move through the space, the adjacencies of the buildings, the overlooking, that's pretty well set at master plan stage. So that's why it's so important you have residents in early doors. Now, the risk of that is it takes you 10 years to get to site, which is what's happened on one of my schemes. And so you've marched people up the hill and then they're all standing looking down, and it's maybe, you know, the market turns against you, or COVID happens, or there's a change in government policy, things that are outside your control. And then you've led everyone, you know, to see the great future, but you can't deliver it. So that is the risk of that early engagement, but it's a risk worth taking, I think.
Great. Thank you. Sarah, did you want to comment on that question at all, or should we go to the next?
Yes, no, yeah, very happy for you to go to the next, but I think Paul answered that perfectly from a Clarion perspective.
Okay, that's great. So Emily McDonald will get the next question. So Emily is a planner with the City of North Vancouver, and she is currently part of a team that is working on the zoning reform. And the City of North Vancouver, for those who aren't from this region, has the audacious goal of being the healthiest small city in the world. So over to you, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those presentations. They were very informative. I had lots of questions I was jotting down throughout, and then you kept answering them immediately afterwards. So really great. But there's one that I was curious about, which I think you could probably both respond to, and that's, what are features that not only contribute to the residents of the buildings, but to the broader neighborhood? And then second part, what are features of the public realm offsite that you feel are essential to, like, supporting these buildings and improving them from the public realm side?
I guess I could have a go at that first. So the way that I've been sort of mapping out this approach is that it's both for within the development, but also for the public space that comes with that development, but also could be used for public space elsewhere eventually. So I think it should be treated with all the features across all the sort of different areas, whether it's about, you know, child-friendly play space, designing well for young people, people from different ages and demographics. I think it's essentially the same thing that I set out, but just making sure that it's connecting both new and existing communities and bringing those different people together and integrating that development in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, if I just add to that, a very good town planner question. So absolutely, designing with a view to who your neighbours are is potentially just as critical as looking inward in the design. So again, this comes back to this point, and we're just responding to William's question. This is about the master planning stage. So understanding where your location is, whether it's a building or a whole estate, where it sits in relation to its neighbours, and the contribution it can make to the surrounding neighbourhood. So in one particular scheme, we're putting a new public park through the middle of the estate. Now, if we were a private developer, we would be enclosing that public park at both ends because your value is in the properties that overlook the park. Actually, we're making the park completely open at both ends because it connects back into the surrounding Victorian streets, which are very dense and have next to no green space. And from our point of view, then it's also encouraging people to cross the road from what is an expensive bit of London and Wimbledon into what is currently a social housing estate with a dodgy reputation. So we're blurring the boundaries. I go on quite a lot about this sort of segregation based on assumptions and class and tenure, all those British things. And actually, we are using the physicality of regeneration to challenge those and change those and encourage those connections across those currently invisible barriers.
Thank you.
Sarah, you have an invitation to just generally jump in whenever you'd like.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to add, I guess I come from the community investment perspective, as Paul kind of said before. And I think the beauty of the work that we're doing around regeneration is that you empower people to have a voice and kind of shape their future neighbourhoods from the offset. So I know Natasha does some work with the Quality of Life Foundation, and actually the work that they're doing is saying how well-being should shape all of our kind of design, both kind of with the physical space, but how we kind of design communities as part of that as well. So I know for us, kind of resident voice is at the heart of what we do. And we try and kind of make sure that people feel that they're having a say and that they're part of that design. So one example is that we've done some work on a new development in Colchester, and we've worked with an agency to engage children and young people in what their potential, their future or their lifetime neighbourhood might be. And actually that's been such a powerful project and programme, because not only has it engaged those young people, which, you know, may be living there in their 80s, but it's also got their families involved, and they feel that they own that area and that they own their community.
Thank you, that's fantastic. All right, we'll go to Lee Bursey. So Lee is a board member with the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association and also the chair of its advocacy committee. Over to you, Lee.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. You can hear me okay, I hope? Okay. I have a two-part question coming to you from two different angles. One is, here in Canada, our non-market housing stock only represents approximately 4% of our entire housing envelope. And looking to my neighbors in the UK, where that's a much more expansive envelope and seems to be a much more expansive part of your culture, I'm curious if you could, for starters, offer us some tips on how to do it better, because I believe that there's definitely an opportunity that exists there. And, you know, as many communities across Canada are going through a housing crisis, I would venture to say all, and that includes not just urban, but also some of the rural and remote as well. Keeping all that very much at the top of the agenda, I would very much love to hear your thoughts on what we could be doing legislatively and as advocacy level agencies to sort of expand that envelope. The second piece, and I know that during the preamble and some of the information backgrounder that was provided, there were talks about many ways to support social connectedness in multi-unit housing. One of the most powerful is to design housing from the onset that intentionally fosters connection. Coming from Atlantic Canada, a lot of our non-market housing stock, I work in supportive housing as an example, and I have trouble sometimes actually getting those who could very much benefit from utilizing that service. And I'm sure that this could be very much echoed to other non-market and community housing agencies or corporations who are dealing with regeneration issues, retrofitting, dealing with community impact of nonprofit housing communities and marginalized communities and some of the high needs issues that exist. I have trouble getting some of my clients or potential clients to fully participate in programming or even move into some of these properties. And I think that I'm curious because I saw a comment about disrupting the familiar template, and it made me think of Edward Scissorhands and all of those homes that look exactly the same in the suburbs. I would be curious if anyone at this panel might be able to share some ideas on what someone like myself, very much on the front line of these issues, could be doing to make community housing look more attractive when we're on fixed budgets with fixed resources?
Oh, the billion-dollar question, Lee. Actually, that would be about a $40 billion question, maybe.
Well, that's why they pay me the big bucks, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I've also had a lot of time to put it that, whole question together, being the last one to speak. So thank you for that.
All right, who wants to tackle that multi-pronged question first?
I'll go first. First thing to say is, Lee, I wouldn't look to the UK as the model for how to do social housing or non-profit housing. I mean, we're making our right pigs here of it really at the minute. We've had, I don't know how many housing ministers in the last 20 years, more than 20. And some of them, the shortest tenure was 3 months. So although it's a huge political issue here, just as it is in Canada, I know I've been watching what's been happening, particularly in Vancouver, and the incredible housing crisis you had there. Here, it's national. We are just not building enough homes of the right kind in the right location, and haven't done for decades. So there are better examples. Every year I skip off to Scandinavia at some point because they do it so much better. I mentioned earlier, Copenhagen's my favorite city. There's lots of issues with all these cities, but they do it better. There's some of the work they're doing in Stockholm at the minute. Some of you will be familiar with Hammarby, but the Hammarby Point 2, which is really the Royal Docks area, amazing work going on there. Definitely worth looking at. And Michelle mentioned Vienna. Like, to me, Vienna is the city that has got social housing right. And by accident, as it turns out, just an accident of history, but actually what they did after the First World War has set them up for a very, very strong model. So I think they're the places to look. We have the quantum, although we're managing to give it all away as quickly as we're building it. We lose far more social rented homes than we build every year, and have been doing for years through the right to buy. So we're not replenishing that stock. And I'll just, when I've got the floor, in terms of legislation, my experience here is the private sector does not react to anything unless they're forced to in the built environment world. And my other sort of great interest is circular economy. I'm sure many people are familiar with the concept of circular economy. That is just now starting to find its way into local government legislation here. And you can see the housing market respond to that because they're having to do it. And it's the same around the climate change. Everyone knows climate change is a problem for years, but now you're pushed and obliged, and you don't get your planning permission without addressing it. And that's what changes. The market, you mentioned how prominent the sort of private sector market is in Canada. It's the same here. They don't do it of their own volition. They don't even think about the business opportunity by repositioning themselves. They have to be obliged to do it. So it needs to come from your legislators.
Paul, I'm just going to interject a quick question here, but I know there's more to say on Lee's questions. Do you see the whole world of ESG investing shifting the private development sector at all in this way, or is it mostly around kind of the environmental sustainability piece at this point?
Yeah, ESG is a big deal with the likes of us. The work that Sarah's team does, Clarion Futures, we top slice the surplus we generate every year, and a big proportion of that goes to support the sorts of projects that Sarah's engaged in, which is the flip side of the physicalities. I'm building new homes, but then the likes of Sarah and her team will come in and support those new communities to settle down and to cope with the huge disruption that comes with regeneration. So we can borrow huge amounts of money on the basis of having a very strong ESG background and commitment to it. And so we'll attract money from people who are looking for a nice steady return, because obviously every home that we let will generate an income, and we'll never have unlet properties. There's such a huge demand. So it's steady money, but it's fairly clean money as well, in that we're a social landlord and we're doing good things. And it's the sort of thing people would want to, companies, like some trade unions or long-term investors want to be associated with. So that's been it's a good question, Michelle. That's been a big change in the last 5 or 6 years in our funding model. Private sector, less so, but increasingly you're starting to see some of the, not so much the house builders, but some of the big developers starting to really throw their weight in behind ESG, the likes of Lendlease, who are the huge Australian multinational, very prominent here in Europe. They place a huge store on their ESG credentials.
Thanks. So back to the rest of our speakers, Sarah, Natasha. Any advice for us here in Canada in terms of what Lee was asking? Yeah, the scale of your non-market housing is so much bigger. You're losing it faster than you're building it. That's also the situation in Canada. We're starting to try to reverse that. We have an acquisition fund in British Columbia now that's enabling non-market housing operators like Brightside, which William leads, to actually buy properties out of the private market and flip them into nonprofit and public ownership. But yeah, any other thoughts from Natasha or Sarah on this very big question?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of I've never really thought about what we could share with another country about it, because I feel like, similarly as Paul set out, it's always fighting the battle to keep the affordable housing into schemes and all the issues with viability. It just seems like yeah, it's an uphill struggle is the way that it's always been in my mind. So I'm not sure if I have any suggestions about what we're doing that's better. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. All right, well, I think it's time then to flip it to questions from the rest of our large participant group. So Ryan, I know that you have been scanning the chat. If you haven't posed a question yet in the chat, you know, we've got a good 20 minutes left here. So please feel free to pop your question in, and Ryan is going to read some out for us. So Ryan, what's your first question lined up?
Well, we have a couple. We have lots of comments, a couple of specific questions. One for Paul. We have a question that just came in from Mark Benning. He asks, he's on the ISO working group for smart multi-generation neighborhoods with Standards Council of Canada. In your view, what do you see as 3 to 5 key elements and standards that we should zero in on? And who do you see as the end users for these standards in the community?
Great question.
I just saw that question pop up. That's a scary question. Thank you, Mark. There's a lot of information in there. I think actually, given you're working on that as well, I'd be very happy for you to contact me outside of the meeting if you'd like to, and we could have a more detailed conversation. I think just to come to the last bit first. Why I like the ISO standards is because it is a standard and it's a recognizable one. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, there's really very, very few policy drivers here in this particular area. So and the fact that it's ISO carries a fair bit of weight. So that's why I'm interested. It is something I can then use when I'm procuring something to drop it in and say, I want to see how your proposal helps contribute to our ISO multi-generational expectations. So it's useful from that perspective. 3 or 5 particular areas, I'll struggle to do that right now, but I said I'd be very, very happy to touch base afterwards. I'm sure there's a good conversation in that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. Great question, Mark, also. We have one for, I have another one for Paul, but I'm going to go to this one from Sue for Natasha right now. Sue is asking, Natasha, do you have an example of a municipal government that has been receptive to policy solutions that incentivize the leading practice standards for developers of large housing developments?
So there's an example in another borough called Essex, and they have a standard which they've done a few years ago, and it's called Live Well. And that, I believe there's sort of different levels of certification with that, which developers can actually apply to get sort of like a gold standard. So that would be what I'm putting forward as the leading practice. So that exists as a model, and I suppose with the Live Well existing format, what I'm trying to do is go a couple of steps beyond that. So I do think it would be something that could work. We don't have any examples of incentives in terms of sort of speeding up planning permission or providing, allowing for additional density, which I think is something perhaps that happens in Canada or is being explored. That would be probably quite radical here, but it'd be something to look at, to really push people to not just do the basic and the baseline. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how that could work.
Maybe just a quick follow-up. I'll just use my power as a co-moderator. I know that that the place quality framework is quite new in Brent. I think it was June that it was kind of enacted. So yes, obviously no examples of new developments using those principles. But do you worry that it could slow down development? That some developers will look at it and build elsewhere because it seems harder? Or do you think you've made the process easy and attractive enough that developers will be keen?
Yeah, I think one of the main aspects was to try and make sure it didn't add any sort of significant burdens either on the planners and also with developers. So we did do a public consultation. The major developers in the area, were supportive. I think because it helps to show how, what are the benefits of their schemes, and they're able to articulate it through this. I think now the general mood and public awareness is focused around, now people are talking about mental health, whereas 10 years ago no one really did. So I think it's actually helping their cause. So yeah, I don't think it would deter development, hopefully. But we're going to do an academic evaluation. We're sort of looking to get a grant to do that, to actually measure the impact and what's changing over the next 12 months.
Well, I guess in the scope of ESG too, it also offers tools for developers to say, hey, look at what we're doing, and if you can evaluate it, look what the impact has been. Yeah.
Yes, and in fact, I've sort of separately had developers ask, can we use it, with no incentive. They don't have to, and to be able to show, how they are addressing these things. And that's, this has just been adopted very recently, so it's all quite new, but I think that's really positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great to hear. Okay, Ryan, next question.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. This might be a quick one for Paul. It was brought up during your presentation. We had a question about, have you provided your communities with access to the digital economy, i.e. Wi-Fi as a minimum?
Yeah, no, we haven't. That's quite a good question, actually. It's a very good question. Wi-Fi is pretty readily available here in the UK. It's not that expensive, so anyone who wants to be online can be online. But what I think maybe the question's hinting at is our use of sort of digital technology as part of our work. And that is increasingly the case. We're very mindful, I've spoken already quite a lot about how we engage with residents. The bottom line is, I know if I'm running a planning consultation around a new planning application, and we're holding it in some church hall, no matter how you organize it, on some of the estates, I could probably write down the list of who's going to come, because it's the same people who come, have been coming for the last 5 years. And if I get a good turnout, it would be 70, 80 people. That's felt to be a good turnout. But in reality, there might be 600 people living in that estate. So digital engagement helps us reach out beyond that, and we reach entirely different audiences. And I think Sarah might want to come in this as well, because there's a whole digitization program that we run through Clarion Futures. But one of the tools we use a tool called eBrick, which we developed on one of the schemes that I showed a picture of earlier, the one with the wooden sheep. On that one, that was the first place we used it. And this is a little tool where people who are going to move into those homes, I'm very conscious we do all this engagement and we talk to them for years, and then planning application goes in and we start on site, and then a 2-meter fence goes up, or a hoarding goes up, and then they see nothing until the new homes are completed 3 years later maybe, and the hoarding comes down, and hey presto, there's these new homes. And we're what we're trying to do is make sure people are connected to their new home, because they're watching it being built outside their window all the way through the process. And so with eBrick, they can literally watch their individual home being built out in real time, because we have a whole series of webcams, and they'll see from foundations to practical completion and handover. And every month we go to site, and the site manager will talk to camera and say, this is what we're going to do this week. So you will see the concrete blocks delivered, and we're going to be using for this, or we're at first fix. This is what first fix means. And so that process, to me, this is trying to not break that golden thread of consultation before you draw anything on the side, on the master plan, right through the whole consultation process, through the build process, and then into operation, and all the way through then. You need to bring that audience with you, and digital engagement increasingly enables us to reach people that we can't otherwise, and we can see how long they've been on site and what their dwell time is and what they've looked at and how that's changed through the life of the project. So we include that in, I've got 5 or 6 projects with eBrick in it now, and my development colleagues hate it because they can't see why I should be spending money on it. To me, it's absolutely essential because this is all about people and connection and community, all the things we've been talking about tonight.
I love that phrase you use, that you don't break the golden thread. I really like that. That you're keeping that engagement and that transparency going from, you know, that potentially 10 years before all the way through. Hopefully not 10 years, that's not what you want, but yeah. Sarah, did you have some comments there?
I was just going to add that we do have a large digital engagement program. So, you know, we've been talking today about the fact that we do have multi-generational neighbourhoods, and some of our residents may not be as digitally savvy as others. So we run what's called a digital champions network, where we'll train up residents to support their peers to get online, and we will offer laptops and tablets to residents that might be looking for work, or younger residents. During the pandemic, we offered access to technology for those that perhaps were struggling to get online with education. So we do that. We do try and have that kind of wraparound support offer. And I was just going to very quickly go back to the last question where we were talking about standards. And I guess, again, from the sort of the S of ESG, we're very much kind of pushing for social value, where we have a social value metrics that we use that has been established by the Housing Association Charitable Trust. And actually lots of housing associations do kind of work towards that. And that's kind of a suite of impact measures that does drive a lot of the work that we do on that social side of things. So beyond the kind of environmental and governance. And one of the things that we're working on with Intergenerational England is looking actually about developing some metrics around intergenerational connections, which, you know, I think is a bit of a gap at the moment. So how can we sort of measure the impact that those multi-generational communities can have on one another, which allows us to attract more funding, hopefully.
Brian, I was going to suggest we have room probably for 2 more quick questions, and then we'll close. So what do you want to grab from the chat? I know I just saw a really good question from William, but I don't want to
yes,
influence it.
We have one from William, and we also have one from Emily. So maybe I'll go to Emily's, who's waiting, and then William will hopefully get to yours, and if not, we will answer it in our post-webinar resources. So Emily asked, I think this probably can go, Emily, you can clarify if you want something specific, but I'll just ask it generally. What have been effective ways to build public and political buy-in for these types of development? The single family home is inadequate for many people, seniors in particular, but they are some of the strongest advocates for maintaining single family neighborhoods.
It's for either of you, or both. Thanks.
Thanks.
I could have a go then. It's in terms of how I found what's been the best way to get people on board with these new formats is really to show case studies and to show really what that looks like, where it's already being done. And often There's different projects that do particular aspects really well around quality of life or connectedness. And I think what's missing is projects that bring all those things together. So you're able to show it from different types of schemes from different places around the world. But I think what would be good is getting some evaluation done around some of those projects. It's really key to then be able to inform and have that evidence to say, yes, it's, you know, increased social interaction by this amount or these amounts of relationships, and really be able to start to map that to get that political buy-in in particular. I think that's what we're missing, but hopefully it's progressing going forwards.
I'll just very quickly add to that. There is, as Natasha's absolutely right. I think the best approach here is, here's one I built earlier on how, you know, how well it works. Because there's a lot of received wisdom about height and density and materiality, and it's not borne out in real life. And you know, ironically, in London here, the densest part of London is Kensington and Chelsea, which is probably the most expensive bit of London. So it's this sort of assumptions without people really understanding it. So half of it is just opening people's eyes to what good design looks like and where communities actually work on the ground and people connect. That's very, very important.
Sarah, does Clarion do pre-occupancy studies with residents, post-occupancy studies? Do you do that kind of thing?
Paul would definitely know much more about this than me, but yes,
okay,
absolutely. Yeah.
So you have strong evidence behind the impacts that your regenerations are having on people's.
We don't really, Michelle, if I'm honest.
No.
We don't do it. We do. We're just starting to get ahead around this. But I have actually, one of my team members, was one of my last calls, is making sure that the lessons learned from early phases in fine detail, you know, from going and talking to the caretaking staff and the cleaning staff, right through to the architects, all of that. So we learn, and of course, residents, as much as we possibly can. Because as an organization, we don't do enough of that. That's definitely a big gap in our understanding, and we're not alone in that. I know there's a few of the other housing associations, particularly here in London, working in that. So it's a good question. It's definitely an area we need to do more on.
Yeah, we're quite interested at Hey Neighbour in kind of pairing housing operators with researchers, because, and I think this will flow nicely to William's last question, especially in the non-market sector, most of the housing operators are very small and there's many of them. And so they don't have the capacity, you know, to do that. I mean, if Clarion's not doing, you know, pre and post occupancy studies, you know, guaranteed that smaller groups aren't. So I think you need other types of organizations to partner with you to be collecting that evidence, and we've done that with Happy Cities. We've partnered with SFU on things like that. Anyhow, over to William's last question very quickly, and then we will wrap.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. So William, thank you for your question. Just under the gun. The last one is, one big difference between the UK and Canada, or at least BC, is that in the UK you have a limited number of housing charities providing tens of thousands of homes, and here in Canada we have hundreds of housing charities providing a couple dozen homes on average. How does scale drive change?
I just jump in again, so bear with me. But in the UK, we have lots of very small non-profits as well, you know, who are maybe just running 30, 40 homes in some instances. So it's a whole gamut of different types of providers. Having said that, a lot are merging at the minute. There's a lot of mergers going on just because of the economics. It leaves those small organizations very exposed. So they're sheltering in the larger organizations. It's a very good question. There's pros and cons that comes with scale. Obviously, some of the projects I'm working on, only an organization the size of Clarion would even think about taking them on. You know, I have one estate at the minute where I have 466 homes to demolish and 800 to build, and we lose £130 million on that scheme. Now, no one else would touch that, but we have to do it because it's so bad. There's no alternative to do it. The downside of that scale is we are a very large organization. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 4,000 staff, and we all come from different backgrounds. I'm a community development worker. At heart, you probably hear that in how I talk about these things. The community is very important to me. I'm really interested in design, and I have pet subjects, which I talk about all the time. Other people in Clarion will have come from a private sector developer. They come from a house builder organization, and they will be very attuned to a completely different set of metrics. And there's that clash sometimes that comes up daily in my world because of the amount of money I'm dealing with, where we don't have this even culture. We're not all doing the same thing for the same reason. And I see Sarah nodding. She will know exactly, because she and I complain about this all the time. And that's one of the risks with it. That sort of arc, the narrative arc that I bring to work every morning isn't the same narrative arc that some other people are bringing to work, but we're working on the same project and we're working to different objectives. The upside is we bring in, getting on for £1 billion a year, and we get to do some amazing bits of work that the private sector would never go near in 100 years. And so you have to sort of bite your tongue and get on with it. So I know it's a very different world from North America. I'm always amazed at how you guys get anything done as nonprofits in North America and the US as well, given how challenging your housing market is and the small scale you have to operate at. So my hat's off to you.
Well, I think you assess the situation here in Canada pretty well, Paul. William is nodding vigorously. I could keep talking to all of you for another 2 hours, but we have reached our time, and I want to be respectful of that. So thank you to everybody who has stayed with us this whole time, and thank you so much to our speakers. It's dinner time where you are now. Your stomachs are probably rumbling, and I hope you get to have a good meal and feel satisfied with this international conversation we've just hosted, and I would love to do more of it. I'm already kind of thinking of the next excuse I can get to come back over to London. So again, thank you very much to all our sponsors and co-hosts as well, and to all of you. And until the next Housing That Connects Us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lots of familiar names. Hello, Jenny Conkin. Hello, Yuri. Hello, Kathy. Who else do I know here?
Hi. Thanks,
Hi,
guys.
Jenny.
That's great.
Good. I'm glad to see you came. We need to have you on your whole own webinar.
Yeah. Anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're making good strides. So exciting. Good to hear different things from different places. So made me think of a lot of stuff that we're putting forward in our community housing fund project coming up here. So
great. Well,
yeah.
I feel like it's been too long since we've connected. Are you going to be at Housing Central?
I will actually.